In this video, I'll run through the 3 procedures involved: breaking the old chain, applying a new link, and peening over the new rivets. This video is designed to guide you through using the Sealey VS779 motorcycle chain breaker and riveter. This tool is designed for modern style chains which have a rivet rather than a circlip type connector. But in particular, it suits the rivets which have a concave end to them, such as these. And the idea is that it will peen over the end of that, and peening is a process where it mushrooms the end of the rivet over to hold the link together. Okay, so this is the kit. It comes in a tough case, as you can see here, complete with comprehensive instructions, and of course you've got this video to watch as well. Included in here we've got 3 different sizes of push pin which push out the old rivets. That's for different types of chain, of course, different sizes. In the case of motorcycles, you'll only require the last 2 pins. One is the pin for pushing out the old rivet, and the other one is for forming the new rivet, peening over the end, as I mentioned before. So if we start to assemble the tool now, I'll show you how it all goes together. The first thing we've got is the tool itself. If we start to dismantle this, we don't need this piece on the end for this operation. Put that out of the way. And we've got an inner and outer drive pins. I'll show you how they work in a second. So this is the inner one I'm taking out now. And this is the outer. So that's the 3 major components that we'll be using. You've then got a handle which screws into the back here. The T-bar, which we use for tightening the tool on some of the operations. We have 2 anvils for when we're putting the chain back together, and 1 final anvil, which is this one here. And then, as I mentioned before, the push pin for pushing out the old rivet, and the former pin for forming the end of the new rivet, and a spring. So that's our major components that we'll be using. Whenever you're using a tool that uses threaded components to push or pull, it's important to lubricate its threads to alleviate wear on the threads and also to make it easier to use. All we need is just a general purpose grease. So what I'll do first of all is apply some of that on here, just on one side of the threads, and then we can wipe it on. Just smear it in like that. And I'd get in the habit of doing this every time that you use it. As I say, it makes the job far easier anyway. The next stage on is to screw in the outer sleeve into the tool until it's just shy of the surface, just rebated, which is around about there. That's fine. The next stage on, we need to take the driving pin and the spring and place those inside, like so, followed by the inner pin, and screw that in, yet again, until it's just shy of the surface. There we are. You can see it just there. Okay, so we're now ready to move on to breaking the chain. Okay, so a chain is held together using hardened steel rivets. Now those are peened over on the top, so they're mushroomed over to hold the links in position. So what we need to do first of all is to grind off the head of those rivets. If you try using the kit on its own to force them and break that head off, it will actually damage the pins in the kit. So this is what we're going to do now. We're going to show you on the bench for clarity, so you can see exactly what we're doing. An angle grinder being used to cut off that peened over head. But the first thing we need to do is to make sure we've got the right PPE. So ear protectors, a pair of welding gauntlets are ideal, or leather gloves, and eye protection, and obviously you're going to need your angle grinder. So as you can see here, I've ground off the head of that rivet. And the next stage on now is we're going to attach the tool and push that rivet back through the chain, which will then break the chain. Okay, so I've mounted the chain into the vise, as you can see here, as I say, just for clarity. The tool is built up, and what we've got here is the anvil is missing off this end, because that hole is going to correspond with the end of the rivet, the other end which hasn't been ground off. And that will act as a centering guide. So if I bring the tool up to it, as you can see, there's a little bit of movement, but it gives us a guideline. We can then screw up finger tight the outer threaded sleeve and then the inner one until it's just tight, like so. Now, using a 14mm socket and a ratchet, I'm going to start to apply pressure to this. The important thing is to keep testing it. Do a little bit at a time, back off and just check it, because as I mentioned, this is a guide. It could be slightly out of position. And what we don't want to do is to be off center and damage the chain or the tool. So I'm going to just do a half turn. If you find it's excessively tight, stop anyway. I'm going to back that off now, have a quick look. That's nothing so far. Let's just try again. Just do a half turn, then back off. I'll show you here. You can see it's starting to push the rivet through. And that's exactly how we want it. I can place that back again now, and we'll continue the operation. It's better to check several times, and if in doubt, stop and realign. There we are. That's got it. I can feel it giving now. Keep screwing it through. It's running through beautifully. And what you will see, as it gets further home, it'll start to appear in the end here. That'll be the rivet being pushed out. Here we are, starting to appear. And you'll soon know when you finish, because it becomes very easy. There we are. And there's the rivet removed. All we need to do now is back off. We can now take the chain apart, and the job's complete. Okay, so we've now driven out the rivet from the chain. The next stage on is to put the chain back together, the new chain. And we do that by using a link. That comes with the new chain. As you can see there's the hollow ends that I mentioned earlier on, which we're going to peen over at the end. But the first thing we need to do is to convert this tool so that it will push on the outer section of the link. You start it off by hand, like so, but then the rest of it needs to be compressed just the right amount so that it doesn't squeeze the chain too much. And we check that by measuring the existing part of the chain with a vernier gauge and making sure that this roughly matches it. So this is how we're going to convert the tool now. So here's the tool. Now we need to convert it. We firstly unscrew the inner pin, take that out, and drop out the rivet pin and also the spring. And the next stage on, we need to put the two anvils in, like so. The grooved side one is going to correspond with the rivets on the back of the chain when we put it on the bike, and you'll see that in a minute. And that will help to center the tool on the chain. And the other side is going to correspond with this side. What it will allow us to do is to push this outer link onto the rivets, and as the rivets pass through, they'll go into these two holes so as they won't obstruct them. Now we now go over to the bike now and I'll show it in operation. Okay, so the next stage on now is on the bike. Bring the chain over so the links are next to each other. Take your new link and slide that through from the rear, like so. So you can see here the rivets are protruding. We can now put on the outer link. There we are, let's pop on there, just pop it on the end. And you can feel there's a resistance then, because we now need to use the tool to compress it. But the important thing here is that we don't over tighten it and squeeze and pinch up the chain, because otherwise it'll stop it functioning properly. So what we need to do now is to take a dimension of the next link using a vernier gauge and use that as a guide, and that's showing 16 millimeters, yes, 15.99 millimeters, and as long as we're thereabouts on this one, within a thou, that'll be fine. So we now know that's how much we need to compress this, no more than that. And what we use for this is the two anvils. The grooved anvil is going to correspond with the existing rivets on the back of the link. So you just slide that until it's there, and that will help to center the tool. And on the other side is going to be the anvil with the two holes, and the two holes will correspond with the two rivets. The important thing is here that we get them in just the right position so they don't interfere with the rivet as it slides through. Okay? And what we need to do is frequently check this as we do it to make sure that it's coming through correctly. Okay, so now I'll put those now into the tool. So the anvils are now back into the tool. Offer that up there like so. Centre it on the back. And finger tight, I'm just going to bring this up here. And the important thing here now is to look through the holes to make sure that they are in alignment with those rivets, as I said before, because we don't want to interfere with them as they come through. Quickly check on there, and they look pretty good. So now we can start to tighten. So we use the 14mm socket in the ratchet wrench and start to tighten. But if you feel undue resistance, stop. Now I'm going to stop there a second, back it off. As I said before, frequently checking, this is the important thing. You can't check it enough to make sure that you're not going incorrectly. Now, you can see here, the rivets are coming through nicely. You can see there, the rivet is just starting to protrude on the other side. We can now put the tool back on. Yet again, make sure that it's in alignment. So it's on the back. Just check on the front that it's in alignment with the rivets, and then we'll continue again. Just a little bit at a time. Oh, that feels lovely. There we are. Back it off again. You can see now the rivets a little bit further. You carry on, that's all working fine. And tighten again. Half a turn. And back off again. Coming through now. Tighten again. Just do that like a half turn each time to be safe. Let's take this off and have another quick look. Now you can see now the rivets now coming through nicely. I can do a quick dimension, whoops, on this. It's going to be a long way off yet, but there's no harm in checking. It's showing 16.57 millimeters, so we've got just over 0.5 millimeter to push through yet before we're ready to start riveting. Let's get that in position again. as I said before, it gets easier now because as the rivets start to protrude, it helps to centre the outer anvil with the two holes in it on the ends. A little bit more now. Back it off again. Clearly see now how far they're protruding through. Let's check this again. 16.33. Roughly about another half turn, I reckon we're probably going to be there. Check that's right. That's it. Tighten again. Back it off. You can see now, protruding through nicely. I don't know if you can read that on the vernier gauge. It's 16.04 millimetres, which is near enough. That's perfectly adequate for this job. The most important thing is that we don't over tighten it, because that's what will pinch the chain and stop it from rotating properly. So the next stage on now, we go back to the bench and we'll convert the tool for the final stage, which is peening over the rivets. So what we need to do now is to convert the tool for the last time to carry out the peening operation, which is where we mushroom over the end of the rivet that holds the links together. And this is how we do it. Firstly, we need to remove the two anvils that were used for compressing the links, and now we use the rivet forming pin and the spring, like so, and they slide in, followed by the inner pin. The difference this time is that rather than having the pins rebated, we actually want to have them protruding, as you can see there. And the idea being that we can see exactly how this end is forming. I'll explain that on the bike in a second. The other thing we need to do, we use the anvil, the round anvil, and the T-bar, because we don't need to apply too much pressure in this operation, so we don't need a ratchet. So we'll go over to the bike now. I'll explain exactly how these two work. Now what I've done here, I've actually formed one of the rivets already. So you can see there's a very subtle difference between the two. They're only slightly compressed. And what happens, the end of the rivet forming pin has this convex dimple on it, and then a shoulder around the edges. And the idea of that is, if I put it up against the unformed rivet, at the moment it's sitting away from the rivet. And the reason being, the indentation in the end of the rivet doesn't match the dimple. Whereas if I put it onto the one which has been formed, it actually sits in, so much so that I can leave the pin hanging in there. And what it's done, it's pushed in, spread the end of the rivet and moved it out, peened it over. That's the terminology for it. So it's now holding that link together. The other side is the anvil, and the anvil has an indentation in it which is shallower than the back rivet, which is already formed. And the idea being that it's only applying pressure on the rivet, not on the link, because we don't want the links to be compressed any further, because we've obviously set those up so that they are a set width. So this is the action that's going to take place. The tool will press either side, and then using the T-bar, it will squash the two together and then cause that rivet to then peen over. Okay, now we can go ahead and do the job. So we've assembled the tool now. The next stage on is to offer up the tool to the chain and links. Here's the back anvil, as I mentioned before, that has a shallow indentation. The idea being that it only applies pressure to the back of the rivet. And at the front of the rivet, you've got the dimpled forming pin, and that is now finger tight onto the end of that. And as you can see, there's a small gap between the shoulder on the pin and the shoulder of the rivet. As I mentioned before, the idea is now that we're going to use just the T-bar. We don't want to put too much pressure on this, to tighten this until those two shoulders meet. And when they meet, that's as much as it needs to be. That's peened over the end. It's spread the end of the rivet and peened it over to hold the link together. It doesn't need any more than that. So I'll start to tighten now. The same applies as before. We'll do frequent checks so you can see exactly what's going on. I'll now back that off. And this is the idea of the pin protruding so you can clearly see what it's doing. Back that out. I'll actually remove the pin so you can see exactly what I mean. See there, if I offer it to that one, you've got quite a sizable gap. On this one, it's starting to get closer. It's not fully home yet. And put the tool back together again quickly. Centre it again on the back. Bring the tool up, finger tight. Back with the T-bar. And a half turn. Back it off again. I'll show you again. Still not quite home, it's almost there. Another half turn should do it. There's quite a bit of resistance now. So now the dimple on the end of the pin has gone into the indentation on the end of the rivet. So much so, I can actually leave the pin there on its own. So that's now fully formed. If I compare that to the one which we haven't done yet, you can see how big the gap is in comparison. There's only subtle the difference, but it's enough that that spread the end of that rivet and secured that link. So we can now see all that remains to do now is to peen over the other rivet, and the job will be completed. All I suggest you do when you've finished is to put a drop of paint on the end of each rivet or correction fluid. The idea being then you can keep an eye on it in the coming months just to make sure that it's performing properly, nothing's coming loose, just to be safe. And that completes the job. Thanks for watching.